You're the fighters? Hey, mama.
Basically, what ended up being played in court was 4K footage of the King Von death from both angles that had never been seen before. Same footage, but way more detail and longer. Now, what I learned from watching that footage that I had never seen before...
Lil Durk reportedly became emotional in court as prosecutors presented video connected to King Von's final moments. The footage brought a heavy atmosphere into the courtroom, and in a trial already surrounded by years of personal and emotional history, the moment carried serious weight. What was said in the hours surrounding King Von's death has now become an important part of the case, putting a painful chapter back under the spotlight in a way many people never expected. Today we're breaking down that emotional courtroom moment, the footage involving King Von and how the defense is presenting the events in Atlanta as part of a much bigger story connected to what happened in Los Angeles years later. Let's get into it.
Man, so King Von's last words to OTF Vonnie before he died was, "Why did you let me get shot?" Hearing all the details about that night, you can tell he trusted his niggas with his life. In his last moments, he probably really felt like they let him down. He got shot, everybody ran and left him in the middle of the street except Muwap. I don't know him personally, but his heart was probably really broken that moment. For him to say, "Why did you let me get shot?" he had to be in disbelief. If he would have survived that night, he probably never would have looked at his niggas the same. A lot of people feel like he was the type of dude that was never gonna change.
To understand why this moment matters so much, you have to understand who King Von was in Lil Durk's life. Von Bennett wasn't simply another artist connected to only the family. He was someone Durk had known for years, with their connections stretching back to Chicago, and long before either artist had reached the level of fame they eventually achieved. King Von became one of the standout storytellers of Chicago drill, known for turning personal experiences and street narratives into detailed songs that felt almost cinematic. His delivery was direct, his style was recognizable, and his ability to make listeners feel like they were inside the story helped separate him from many artists around him. His relationship with Lil Durk also became a major part of OTF's identity. The two artists came from similar surroundings but brought different energy to their music. Together, they helped create the feeling that OTF was more than just a record label. It represented a real connection, a shared history, and a movement built around people who had known each other long before the spotlight arrived.
Lil Durk trial heating up. We got OTF Vonnie saying that Lil Durk is the big man and he's the one that set the whole play up. But Durk's attorneys, his lawyers, are saying that Vonnie was told by King Von, "Why did you let me get shot?" before he was unalived, man. And they saying that this built up in Vonnie's mind. Vonnie was the orchestrator of the whole play, and this led him to go out and do exactly what they did to Lil Pop. So it's a back and forth going right now. It seems like everybody's pointing the fingers at everybody right now, and it's just a sad situation, especially in that federal courtroom. Y'all get in the comment section right now. Let me know what y'all thinking, man.
When King Von died, it was far bigger than losing a collaborator. For Lil Durk, it meant losing someone with deep personal ties to his life. Grief like that doesn't simply disappear or follow a clean timeline. Sometimes it stays with you, changes how you see the world, and makes everything that happens afterward feel different. Von was also building serious momentum in his career. His storytelling, delivery, and authenticity had helped him develop a rapidly growing fan base and a future that looked bigger by the day. His death at 26 didn't just end one life, it also ended the possibility of countless songs, projects, performances, and moments that fans will never get to hear or see.
The feds just cooked Lil Durk in court. Now, if you guys don't already know, Lil Durk's trial has actually begun, and today has been the first day with opening statements, and the feds have dropped some bombshells, let me tell you. Because now we're coming to find out that Lil Durk's right-hand man, OTF Vonnie, was rolling around in a white BMW following Quando Rondo and Lil Pop around California, tracking him down so the shooters could take him out. And if you guys don't remember, the feds had went out to drop a bunch of photographs photographs of this BMW where it's seen following the Cadillac where Lil Pop and Quando Rondo were seen riding around in the day of the murder. And now we're coming to hear that that white BMW that OTF Vonnie was driving around in trying to track Quando in actually had a tracking device in it. Now, that tracking device wasn't on that car because of the feds. Funny enough, that tracking device was actually placed on there by the company that actually rented out the car to OTF Vonnie. Yes, OTF Vonnie actually rented out a car to go hunt down his ops. Now, the feds actually went back to the rental company and they got full logs of every single stop that BMW made.
That distinction changes the entire picture of who is relying on the most emotional evidence in this trial and why. According to the defense's presentation in court, one of King Von's final coherent interactions before his death was directed towards someone specific. Von reportedly looked toward Kayvon Grant, also known as OTF Vonnie, a close associate and cousin, and asked a question that the defense says deserves serious attention from the jury. The question, as presented by the defense, was why Grant had allowed Von to get shot. That alleged statement became the foundation for one of the defense team's most important arguments so far. They are asking jurors to look closely at Von and Grant's relationship because the defense says there was much more there than a simple connection through music or OTF.
Getting shot can change you because you know that shit can happen in the spur of a moment. Y'all gotta understand, before that, King Von probably felt untouchable. Once you know that shit can happen to you, that can make you more humble. Like I said, if he would have survived, he probably would have turned his life around. Even the Wooski dude from Chicago looked like he more humble. I don't know who need to do it, but somebody gotta turn King Von's life into a movie. His life and career was crazy as hell when you really think about it. Most of the niggas he rode for from his hood turned out weird on him.
According to the defense, Von and Grant lived together and shared a joint bank account, showing a level of trust and closeness that went beyond business. So, in the defense's telling, Von's final question wasn't some random comment made in a chaotic moment. They argue it was a direct accusation, with Von appearing to hold Grant responsible for what happened around him. Exactly what Von meant remains open to interpretation. It could have related to Grant's position during the shooting, what Von believed Grant should have done, or something more specific that only those involved fully understood. But the defense wants the jury looking at Grant's role in that night from a different angle than the prosecution has presented.
That day. And this is where it just gets stinky, man, because now we're coming to find out that the feds were able to pinpoint that BMW at the gas station when Lil Pop and Quando Rondo got shot up. They were also able to track that same car at Lil Durk's Airbnb out in California before they pulled up to the gas station. And after they went and did the hit at the gas station, that same BMW pulled up to an In-N-Out where OTF Vonnie and the rest of the guys were seen without masks, wearing what it seems to be different t-shirts from what they had at the gas station where the altercation went down, but they were still wearing the same sweats and sneakers. Come on, man. Get them out of here! On top of all that, OTF Vonnie used the Amex credit card that was linked to one of Lil Durk's companies to rent the car, buy the ski mask, and buy the flights, man. And if it doesn't get worse than that, OTF Vonnie and OTF Jam are about to take the stand to verify that everything that the prosecutors are saying is true. Close that back door, cause I know that is phony.
And that matters because Kayvon Grant is a key cooperating witness in the federal case. He has pleaded guilty and agreed to testify for the prosecution against Lil Durk. That gives the defense a clear target: challenge Grant's credibility and give jurors another reason to question his account of events. The strategy is straightforward but powerful. If jurors start wondering whether Grant has a personal motive, questionable judgment, or reasons to shape his testimony, then everything he says about the alleged murder-for-hire case could receive closer scrutiny. The defense is essentially taking one of the most painful moments connected to King Von's death and using it to challenge the government's witness. And that is where One Night in 2020 starts connecting to the much larger case that has Lil Durk facing proceedings in a federal courtroom in Los Angeles today. The government's case is built around the argument that what happened outside the hookah lounge set off a much bigger, multi-state conspiracy that prosecutors say Lil Durk helped organize and finance. FBI agent Jerron Farmby took the stand and read text messages recovered from Durk's devices from the hours after King Von was killed. According to the government's presentation, Durk told a close associate that he felt dead inside, but prosecutors say other messages from later that same day showed a different side of the situation. They pointed to surveillance footage of the fight being shared with associates alongside messages they interpreted as references to retaliation and "get back." Prosecutors aren't presenting those messages as simple expressions of grief. They argue the communications were early signs of a larger plan. Then there is the "Pissed Me Off" music video. Prosecutors argued that the video went beyond creative expression and should be viewed as a message aimed at people within OTF who wanted retaliation connected to Von's death. The judge allowed the government to use that material, giving prosecutors another piece of evidence they say supports their theory. From there, federal prosecutors draw a line from November 2020 to August 2022, when they allege a 5-person group traveled to Los Angeles while searching for Quando Rondo. That search eventually led to a shooting near the Beverly Center. Quando survived, but his cousin, Xavier Robinson, also known as Lulpav, was fatally shot. The prosecution wants the jury to connect all of these pieces, the texts, the music, the surveillance, and the shooting, into one continuous campaign of retaliation that allegedly began after King Von's death. That is a major part of the government's story, and they are asking jurors to look at the events as connected rather than isolated. But this is where the defense pushes back hard. They do not deny that Lil Durk was deeply affected by Von's death. They are not claiming he felt nothing or simply moved on. Their argument is much narrower. Being devastated by the loss of someone close to you does not automatically make you the person who planned or directed a murder-for-hire conspiracy. In other words, the defense wants jurors to separate emotion from criminal intent. Grief alone is not proof of a crime, and the defense plans to emphasize the enormous gap between the emotional aftermath of November 2020 and the alleged retaliation operation in August 2022. Prosecutors have also presented digital evidence showing what people connected to Durk were discussing and sharing after Von's death. Surveillance footage, messages, and other records have been used to reconstruct the atmosphere surrounding OTF during that period. The government's position is that those conversations reveal more than anger or mourning. Prosecutors say they show an environment where retaliation was being discussed and encouraged among people connected to Durk. The defense, meanwhile, is challenging whether those communications actually prove that Durk himself directed the alleged operation. Investigators have presented these communications as evidence of a sustained and coordinated response to King Von's death, arguing that the messages show more than people privately dealing with grief. But the defense sees it very differently. They argue that conversations are not automatically plans, and that being angry after losing someone close does not equal organizing a murder. That distinction between grieving and planning could become one of the biggest questions for the jury. They will have to examine what was actually said in those messages and decide whether the conversations show criminal intent or simply people reacting emotionally to an extraordinary loss. The defense wants jurors to be careful about turning heated words into something they may not have meant. Then there is the music. Prosecutors successfully argued that Lil Durk's "Piss Me Off" music video could be presented as evidence at trial. The government's interpretation focuses on parts of the song and visuals that they say connect to the anger and retaliation themes surrounding Durk after Von's death. The video includes several references to Von. Durk appears wearing a chain featuring Von's nickname, V-Roy, along with a shirt displaying Von's image, while audio connected to Von is also incorporated into the track. Prosecutors have also prepared witnesses to discuss the setting where the video was filmed and what they say were connections to the OTF organization. For the government, this is more than a music video. They argue it is a piece of evidence that helps show Durk's mindset during that period. But the defense is pushing back on that interpretation, and their argument raises a much bigger question that has become increasingly important in courtrooms across the country. When should a rapper's lyrics or music videos be treated as evidence of criminal intent? The defense argues that rap is an artistic form built around storytelling, exaggeration, metaphor, fictional characters, and dramatic language. A song about revenge does not automatically mean the artist carried out a real revenge plan. A lyric expressing anger is not automatically a confession. Their position is that the jury should consider the music in its full artistic context instead of treating every line, image, or reference as a literal statement of what Lil Durk intended to do in real life. That difference between artistic expression and actual criminal intent could become a major battleground as the trial continues. That disagreement over how music should be interpreted inside a courtroom is one of the most important cultural and legal questions coming out of this trial. Now let's focus more closely on Kayvon Grant, because his role in this case is anything but ordinary. Grant is being presented by the prosecution as a cooperating witness. He has pleaded guilty and is expected to testify about what he says he knows regarding the alleged murder-for-hire operation, but at the same time, the defense is pointing toward Grant as someone who may have played a role in the Los Angeles events without Lil Durk's knowledge or approval. The defense has argued that Grant used business resources connected to astronaut sounds and other company accounts to help facilitate parts of the alleged operation. Their position is that he may have acted independently rather than carrying out instructions from Durk. That creates a major credibility issue for the jury to consider. It puts Grant in a very unusual position. On one side, he is one of the government's key witnesses. On the other, the defense is presenting him as an alternative explanation for how the alleged operation could have happened. And the defense's focus on King Von's final interaction with Grant is designed to make jurors look at Grant's connection to the original tragedy from a completely different angle. The defense isn't simply using the standard argument that cooperating witnesses have reasons to help themselves. They are going deeper. They argue Grant had a personal connection to the events surrounding Von's death that deserves serious scrutiny. They point to his relationship with Von, his presence around the people involved, and his position within this larger story. That leaves the jury with a sharp question. Is Lil Durk really the person at the center of everything the government has described, or could someone much closer to the original events have played a larger role than prosecutors are suggesting? This is where the cooperating witness issue becomes absolutely critical. The defense has repeatedly challenged the reliability of government witnesses, focusing on how investigators handled interviews and recorded statements. Brian Steele, Durk's lead defense attorney, has highlighted those issues in front of the jury. According to the defense's presentation, OTF Gem was interviewed roughly 30 times by investigators, but only 3 of those sessions were recorded. OTF Von was reportedly interviewed around 10 times, with none of those meetings recorded. For the defense, those missing recordings create an obvious problem. The jury cannot independently hear everything that was said during those interviews. And when a witness's testimony could carry major weight in a federal case, the question of exactly what was asked, what was answered, and what may have changed over time becomes a serious point of contention. Flacco was reportedly interviewed around 15 times, with only 1 of those sessions recorded. Steele pressed investigators about those numbers while questioning them on the stand, and the issue could matter a lot. When someone is interviewed dozens of times without a recording, it becomes harder for a jury to determine whether the person's story stayed consistent, changed over time, or was influenced by the direction of the questioning. That is not some tiny detail. In a case where cooperating witnesses play such an important role in the government's theory, the lack of recordings from most of those interviews gives the defense something significant to challenge. Steele is using that gap to push jurors to question exactly how those witnesses' accounts developed. But prosecutors have an answer. They point to evidence they say exists independently of those witnesses. Digital records do not suddenly change because a witness changes their story. Financial transactions either happened or they didn't. Flight records either show a trip or they don't. Surveillance footage captures whatever the cameras recorded. The government's argument is that cooperating witnesses are only one piece of the puzzle. Prosecutors say their testimony is supported by digital, financial, travel, and surveillance evidence that can be examined separately. Whether jurors believe that evidence provides enough support is one of the biggest questions hanging over the case. Now let the timeline sink in for a second. November 2020, King Von is killed outside a hookah lounge in Atlanta. Lil Tim was charged in connection with the shooting, but that case was later dismissed. Lil Durk and the OTF community were left dealing with the loss while the public watched closely and waited to see what would happen next. In the days afterward, digital communications presented by the government show what prosecutors describe as intense emotion and anger inside Durk's circle. The "Piss Me Off" video later became another piece of material prosecutors say reflected the emotions surrounding Von's death. But according to the government's theory, something else was happening behind the scenes. Prosecutors alleged that plans were developing to target people they believed were connected to Von's death. The defense disputes the idea that these events can simply be connected into one organized operation. Then comes August 19, 2022. According to prosecutors, people connected to Lil Durk traveled to Los Angeles and carried out an ambush near the Beverly Center targeting Quando Rondo. The government says that shooting is the point where the earlier emotions, communications, and alleged planning all come together. Quando survived the shooting, but his cousin, Savia Robinson, known as Lil Pab, was killed after being shot in the torso. The medical examiner later described the injuries to the jury in clinical detail, creating a moment that reportedly left the courtroom quiet. Then came October 2024, when Lil Durk was arrested. A federal indictment followed, and the case eventually moved into trial in Los Angeles, the same city where Lil Pab was killed. Now, jurors are being asked to decide whether the events surrounding King Von's death in Atlanta truly set the alleged retaliation campaign in motion. And this brings us to the central question hanging over the entire case. Was King Von's death really the starting point of the campaign prosecutors describe, or is the government connecting events that happened nearly 2 years apart while relying heavily on cooperating witnesses whose accounts developed through numerous interviews, many of which were not recorded? There is no simple answer. That is exactly what the jury has been brought in to determine. The prosecution's theory is straightforward and emotionally powerful. A close friend and collaborator is killed. The person charged in connection with that shooting later sees the case dismissed. Durk and people around him are left dealing with the loss while public attention remains intense. Prosecutors say Durk's own communications show how deeply affected he was and how much pressure surrounded the situation. Then, almost 2 years later, an alleged organized attack takes place against people connected to the person associated with Von's death. From the government's perspective, those events form one continuous story, and they are asking the jury to see the connection as deliberate rather than accidental. The defense offers a different way of looking at the same timeline. They agree that Von was killed and that Durk was devastated, but they argue that grief is not the same thing as conspiracy. Instead of focusing on the emotional storyline, the defense wants jurors to examine each person's individual actions, communications, and motives. According to the defense, Grant had his own close relationship with Von, his own connection to the events surrounding Von's death, and his own place in the story. They argue that if Grant acted independently and without Durk's authorization, then the government may have connected the right events to the wrong person. And think about the weight of that for a moment. King Von has been gone since November 2020, yet his final moments are now being discussed in a federal courtroom years later. Words spoken during an unimaginable moment have become evidence that both sides are asking a jury to interpret in completely different ways. The people who loved King Von have spent years carrying the weight of his death, creating memorials, releasing tribute music, and trying to process a loss that came far too soon. Now, inside a federal courtroom in Los Angeles, moments from the end of his life have been taken out of that personal grief and placed into the legal record as evidence. The question reportedly directed at Grant in Von's final moments, "Why did you let me get shot?" is now being examined by attorneys and presented for jurors to consider within a murder-for-hire prosecution. Whatever Von meant when he said those words, the courtroom gives them a completely different context. That shift is one of the most unsettling parts of this entire case. And when you look past the dramatic headlines, the idea of an emotional breakdown takes on a different meaning. It may not be one clearly documented moment of Lil Durk collapsing or crying in front of the jury. Instead, it can describe the accumulated pressure of sitting through a federal trial where the worst loss of your life is being presented as part of the alleged motive for a crime you say you did not commit. Imagine hearing attorneys dissect the final words of someone you cared about, with 12 strangers listening closely and deciding what those words might mean. Imagine years of grief, memories, and public attention suddenly becoming part of a legal argument about criminal intent. That kind of pressure does not need a dramatic courtroom scene to feel overwhelming. A person does not have to visibly fall apart for the weight of a moment to be real. There does not have to be tears caught on camera or some dramatic scene for the emotional stakes to be understood. Sometimes, breaking down under pressure looks much quieter than that. In this courtroom, the emotion comes from the collision of two worlds, personal grief on one side and legal evidence on the other. King Von's death remains deeply personal to the people who knew and loved him, but inside this trial, his final moments are being examined through arguments about intent, credibility, and responsibility. That is what makes this part of the case so emotionally charged. It requires understanding what it means to sit in that courtroom and listen as someone you lost becomes part of a legal argument. To hear their final words repeated for the record, then watch 12 strangers examine those words and decide whether they reveal something about you is a different kind of pressure. It is quiet, personal, and heavy in a way that may never show up on camera, but that does not make the emotion any less real. The bigger question is whether that grief, that loss, and Lil Durk's connection to King Von ultimately prove what prosecutors say they prove, or whether the defense has raised enough questions for the jury to see another possibility. Does the government's evidence establish Durk's responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt, or has the defense created enough uncertainty around the witnesses, communications, and timeline to challenge that theory? That answer will ultimately belong to the jury. The verdict will determine what happens next for Lil Durk as this federal case reaches its most important stage. And years after King Von's death, outside that Atlanta hookah lounge, his final words are still being discussed, analyzed, and debated inside a courtroom hundreds of miles away. A single night can leave consequences that stretch far beyond the moment itself. What began with a devastating loss has now become part of a federal prosecution involving questions about loyalty, grief, witness credibility, intent, and responsibility. Nobody watching that night unfold in 2020 could have known how far its consequences would reach. For now, the courtroom is where those questions are being tested. The evidence has been presented from competing perspectives, the defense has challenged the government's narrative, and the jury will ultimately have to decide what the evidence proves and what it does not. So what do you think? How should King Von's final words be viewed in this trial? Do you think the defense's strategy creates enough reasonable doubt, or does the government's broader timeline make its case stronger? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more updates and breakdowns as this case develops, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who follows the story. Your support helps the channel keep bringing you more coverage, so stay tuned for what comes next.